RevOpsAF, the only podcast for people who are RevOpsAF and want to learn all about things that are RevOps AF.
Our goal is to give the revenue operations community, that includes marketing, sales, and CS, for any of you not paying attention, the skills needed to accelerate their careers.
Hi, and welcome to RevOpsAF, the podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Camela Thompson, and today I'm joined by Ashley Vonella. Ashley, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Hi, everyone. So as Camela said, my name is Ashley Vonella. I am currently the Director of Revenue Operations at Velocity EHS. Outside of that day job, I do quite a bit of consulting for the RevOps folks, as well as a little female empowerment for all of our folks trying to move up in the corporate world.
This is amazing. So today we're going to be talking about structuring goals and thriving with neurodivergence. I think more of us are divergent than we know, and would love to know what are some signs that we should start setting goals a little bit differently, and then we can get into how to set those goals.
Sure. So first off, I was only diagnosed a few years ago. I think that that's something, particularly with women, that it was just missed. Many of us growing up in the 70s, 80s, 90s, it was missed, right? Now, I have a bunch of weird traits. So, it came out eventually. And they're like, you know what, you should get tested. I'm like, okay, at 30 years old, I'm going to go and get tested. And for the folks that don't know me, I am autistic. So you will see me maybe ask way too many questions and then not ask enough questions. If you hit on my hot topics like volcanoes, you'll be stuck for a long period of time talking about volcanoes. But to relate this back to our goals, as we're starting the year, and particularly with folks that are neurodivergent, many of us get in this hyper-fixation schedule of, oh my gosh, it's the new year, we have so much to do. And then we plan a lot. And there are, I don't know if anybody else feels this, but in January, I had 37 number one priorities. And that's really, really tough to deal with. I know we're going to get into strategies in a minute, but as we look at goal setting, one of the first things I always recommend folks to do, look beyond the first month and first quarter of the year. Many times we actually don't set our goals large enough. So we set a whole bunch, but we set them really short term. Like, I need to get all of this stuff done this week. And then for any of our folks that have ever dealt with neurodivergent burnout, where you get to the point of where you can't do anything, the stress that comes with that is really overwhelming. So highly recommend starting with those longer term goals and then breaking it down into something more manageable.
Oh, I didn't know it would be this relatable, but right now it's mushrooms for me. And I think I'm in one of those burnout phases.
Yeah.
So maybe we can talk a little bit about how to think of maybe some example goal setting exercises for people in revenue operations.
Absolutely. So one of the first things that I do when I think about goal setting for revenue operations, look at the year as a whole. So when you're thinking about the business goals, and one of the most important things is if you're also looking for career growth, look at what your business has given you as these are our corporate goals for the year. Then take that one level deeper and say, how can I, in my individual role, tie to those business goals? And then start there. I think a lot of people miss the bigger picture. They may say, oh, we need ARR growth, or, oh, we need more bookings. And then they're like, okay, my job is to get more Salesforce fields in. That's tough, right? You're not pulling that metric all the way through down to your level. But if you think about it a little differently, you can. Why are you actually adding those Salesforce fields? Well, you're adding them to make your sales team more efficient so they can drive more bookings, right? So you just need to take the corporate goals, start there, and look at your year as a whole. Then break it down by quarter. And what I like to do when I look at quarters is say, what's my big initiative and what does this drive for us? And then you start to plan backwards. That's something that I have found much more, it's easier to break it down that way. If you look at the year and these big giant goals and then say, oh, but today I'm working on this field. You're like, I don't know where that ties in. I don't know where the relation is.
You mentioned having this big separation between the big goal and your goal can be kind of discouraging. What are some other things that get in the way of us maintaining goals? And when I think of New Year's resolutions, I think of sometimes setting unrealistic goals, like getting into the gym every single day. As soon as you start missing those days, it's going to be a problem.
This is something really common. Once you actually get down from yearly to quarterly to monthly goals, I look at my list and I cut it in half. I look at all the things I said I was going to do and cut it in half. Those are what I call my non-negotiables. Those are the top things I have to get done. All those other items are ones that I'm like, these are great. This will help the business. This is, if you guys ever use some of the other terms, this is a delighter. This is a good thing, but I don't have to get that done. And I find, especially with the burnout piece, that helps me plan like, I have 100 things on my list, but actually these 12 are the really important ones. Let me focus on them. Let me make sure my calendar is aligned with the time that's necessary to get those done. And then everything else, it's a win, right? It's extra. One of the big pieces I think is really important, depending on what stage your organization is in. If you have a lot of flux, check in with your leaders. Have a good idea, like, do we think this is a formal win? Do we think there's going to be changes? Sometimes they have better ideas or they have more insight into what the board's thinking, what your leadership is thinking, and they may say, you know what? This is going to change. We don't think these are going to change. Then I take that long list and see which of these items are necessary for the business as a whole versus this is great today. In a month, we might not even use this, and try to prioritize that way. That's helped me through the process.
Yeah, things coming to my mind are people who are really insistent that they need something, but you have additional context. It's really hard to communicate. I know you really love that, but
it's a fine balance. So one of the ways that I actually use a sales technique here, one of the things that I ask is, how do you plan on using this? So you ask those how questions instead of the what questions. Because what I find there is you end up getting an outcome, what they're looking for. And many of our RevOps people on the phone, you probably know a better way. For any of the neurodivergents that also have the psychic theory, we see the patterns before the patterns happen. You probably see a better way than what your sales leader or your marketing leader sees in their head. Don't be afraid to ask them how so that you can get to the what instead of having them solution for you.
one thing I've had to learn the hard way over and over again is people don't think like you, and they aren't necessarily where you are. So you need to allow them the space to get to the point where you are, and you can help guide them there. But just stating a solution, you're not going to sell them on it. So how do you think about advising people in socializing and social selling a little bit more when it comes to goal setting in particular?
Goal setting, number one, this should never be done in a vacuum. A lot of people set their own goals and they never tell anybody else. One of the primary things outside of your manager, and for any of you guys that have read my book, I highly recommend getting a copy, this is one of the things we talk about in there. You should not be the only one that knows about your goals. Your superior should know, but also your boss's boss should know, and then someone else in a related team. You might say, why is that important? Why do we want other people to know? Number one, it gives you accountability. But number two, it also allows them to start thinking of things that are going to get in your way to getting those goals. So you hear about one thing, and then actually there's this little birdie over in another corner that maybe you don't talk to every day that has a problem going on that's going to directly stop your goals, right? You're fostering that level of communication and collaboration. When you tell folks, hey, this is what I'm trying to focus on, this is what we're going on, can you help me? Is there anything in the way, right? And a lot of folks, when they feel a part of your journey, then they want to help. Instead of it being, these are my goals, I'm not going to tell you anything about them, I'm in my own little bubble, it actually helps to have that social conversation. Say, I know what your goals are. Here's how I'm going to help you on your goals. Now, can you help me on my goals? And that just builds a really nice level of collaboration across the team.
So from a manager standpoint, I think sometimes it's hard to see how certain goals are tied to my objectives. And sometimes it's because that person wants to move a different direction in their career but hasn't communicated it. Mm-hmm. So let's tie this a little bit more into how we think about our career path and how we should be communicating that as well.
Yeah, so number one, and for anybody that's worked for me, they know, I am one of those people that's going to ask you about your career path. And the answer can be, I don't know. That's perfectly okay. What's not okay is you struggling alone, right? And I think that's extremely important when you're thinking about your managers, or if you are a manager in a people leading position. It's so important to know that not everybody's comfortable sharing, but if you can create a safe space that their uncertainty isn't judged, That's the foundation. That foundation of trust is how you move forward and you start to plan career goals. But one of the things I recommend for folks that are in the individual contributor role is start to think bigger. So don't think about this next year. Think about 5 to 10 years and where you'd like to be. And then socialize that with your manager, but also socialize that with some of the sales leaders and ask them, these are some of the things that I'd like to do in the next 5 to 10 years. Do you have suggestions on how I can get there? Now, I know that's scary, right? Asking anybody else for external feedback is scary, but it also gives you an opportunity to hear where sometimes things are a little weaker than you think. Sometimes you say, I'm great at all this. They're like, actually, no, you're not. But it's a tough spot to be in. But at the same time, anytime you're talking about career changes and career growth, you have to grow. And the only way to grow is to get uncomfortable. So I'd recommend keeping that conversation open, but then also continuing to bring up your goals. One of the things I ask with all of my folks when we go through quarterly reviews is, hey, here's what I have in my mind for your career path, for your career goals. Does this still match with how you're feeling? Is there an education class we can get you to push onto that? Have you run into something else you're more interested in? So that open line of communication and the continual revisiting those topics is extremely important. Most of our folks on the phone are going to be math-oriented in one way or another. If you think about a line, none of this is a straight line. You're going to get a nice squiggle. And the more touch points you have in between here and there, the smoother the curve is going to be. Highly recommend keeping that conversation open and then finding a trusted advisor at a higher level than you are in the organization to keep that openness and transparency with you.
Yeah, and external mentors are so valuable, especially if you worked with them in the past. They're no longer in the company. They can give you a more objective lens while still knowing how you operate. They can bring in some of your blind spots. That's super useful. But your team's very lucky because not all managers are super supportive of helping someone who's really useful and good at what they are moving into something else.
Yeah.
How would you recommend people think about advocating for themselves and promoting that kind of direction?
First off, specifically if your manager or whoever is directly above you is not supportive, you got to be a little careful. We're not trying to get anybody fired here. That's not in any way what we're going to do. What I recommend is looking at your role and picking things that are on the edges of your role. So, for an example, let's say you are in a deal desk position, but you don't touch order processing or you don't touch contract language. They're very closely related to deal desk, but they might not be in your specific role. It would be a reasonable extension to ask your manager, hey, can I go learn or can I go sit in to give additional coverage to the team that's right next to ours, right? From most managers' perspectives, as long as you're still doing your day job, they're going to say yes to that because that helps make sure they look good at the bigger objective. If you start moving in that direction, it'll start to give you a little bit of exposure without having your manager flip their lid and freak out. So that's normally what I recommend. Try to expand laterally and make sure that there's some tie back to your position. Now, if you're in a job and you absolutely don't like the job at all and you're trying to learn something completely different, that's tough. That's where I would really recommend those external mentors or some external courses or study so that you can try and get some experience in that without disrupting the flow of what's happening in your day-to-day.
So I'd like to take this from the manager's lens now. This is fantastic advice for an individual contributor, but as managers, we have a lot of people reporting to us. Some of them are way too hard on themselves. Some are in the middle, which is super healthy. And then some are really shocked when they don't get a glowing review. And we've all been there. How can we help the folks who are just really shocked and convinced that everything's going well?
Yeah. So one of the things that I do with my folks that seem to be way off base is very, very structured goals. So like down to, if we have a scale of 1 to 5, everybody should be at a 3. A 4 is really good. A 5 is exemplary. Here are the exact list of things that you have to reach a 4. Because then what happens when we come to review time, it takes that subjectivity out of it and puts it more on the objective lens and say, okay, actually out of this 4 category that you just rated yourself, you only did 2 of the 8 items. And if I actually look at the number 3 or the number 2, you actually only met all of the criteria in number 2. And It's still generally not received super well, but at least they are having to adjust their expectations based on the expectations we have already agreed on and communicated about. I think it's really important. A lot of folks get to that part of their journey because their manager hasn't communicated expectations with them. And if you guys can start and agree on expectations, it makes it worlds easier as you move forward.
Which is why I love this conversation. That's all going to come back now, and you'll see the master structure to all of this. So what I love about what you've been talking about, I just want to call out, is if you make a standard, normal, rigorous practice of setting goals with your team, you have that structure in place so that we don't have as much divergence. You will, but it's going to happen anyway. But in this way, you are setting clear expectations. They're probably SMART goals. They're measurable. You can see whether or not they're being done. It's either binary or you're getting a percentage done. This helps everyone. I don't know anybody who doesn't benefit from understanding with clarity what they're expected to do. And it's not micromanaging.
No.
So maybe we talk about this in a little bit more concrete examples for certain team members. So maybe we first talk about an analyst and then a system admin and give some examples of goals we might set.
So analyst for me, a few that I look at depending on where your reporting structure is. So if they have to do weekly, monthly, quarterly reporting, whatever that is, it will also depend on what state it's in. Is it already built and they're just maintaining, or does it need to be built? If it needs to be built, putting a timeline on when it needs to be built. So I think that's a really, really crucial piece, but then related to build, what's included in the build? And especially if you're looking for those 4s and 5s, that's where you start to get that cross-department collaboration. Did you train your sales leaders? That's an important piece in number 5, because if nobody can use your report, that's not helpful to anybody, right? And that's really where you also start to develop your individual contributors to be that next level. Because if they're really shooting for that 5, they're going to have to learn how to deal with their stakeholders. So that's a big piece when I think about analysts. It's not only building or designing the reports themselves, but that training and collaboration aspect on the higher end of the scale.
Yeah, and I like how you called out one point I have a lot of people, managers, kind of like quietly voice concerns about is, my team's really good at getting really accurate data and making sure the numbers are right, but the reports are so complex that the end users don't know how to interpret them or really use them.
Okay.
So it's really about coaching them do we expect people to self-serve with this? If so, what are the realistic parameters we should be setting here? And if not, what's the cadence of communication you're going to provide for them? So that's fantastic. So let's switch gears just a tiny bit and talk about maybe a system admin. And then I'll give you a little more parameters so we can figure out how to coach them. Let's say they're super good at understanding how the system works, how to do things very efficiently, but we're not always looking at how usable things are.
The UI.
And how many things are being stacked on top of each other. So if we're trying to move through that process, like how many required fields, validations, all of that. How will we go about setting a goal for them and coaching them to kind of step out of the too technical and start interacting more with people around them?
One of the foundational requirements that I would put in every level of the scale is they have to do what I call a ride along with their end user. So if it's a RevOps manager, and the first thing they do before they design anything else, go watch your end user do their process right now. Because if you don't understand the steps that your end user has to take, whatever new thing you're going to do, you're going to miss the pain. And a lot of the times, I will tell you, even if you've designed something perfectly, your end users will find a way to break it. They find a way around, we just had a recent example where I don't even know how this person had this view, but they had been a seller for a long time. They accidentally were in the wrong profile and had a little carrot somewhere there shouldn't have been. And I was like, where did you find this? Where did we even get that? I would have missed that completely if I wouldn't have sat with them and walked through their workflow, right? So absolutely the first thing they should do is sit through their current workflow, design their changes, understand the pain points of their end user, and then after they've designed, and most of us should be using a sandbox, right? Show your end user in the sandbox and get their feedback. You have to have feedback as a part of your goal setting process. Otherwise, you're building things just for you. That's where we end up on this divergent path of where systems and your actual sales or marketing users don't understand each other.
I love that. So I'm hearing a lot of interactions with end users. I've personally recorded Zoom meetings where they do a screen share and I watch what they do. And I had that same epiphany where I'm like, where did you eat? How did you click? Why did you click there? But if somebody's doing it, someone else is probably doing it too. And it's a great sign to change it. I love that. And then on the reporting side, I can see the same kind of technique working really well when it comes to, let's watch a sales manager try to navigate the report and see how quickly they lose their temper and bounce away from it.
Absolutely. Because if you're not meeting their end goal, they're not going to use your report. They're going to try to build their own thing that you just spent weeks building so that it did what they asked for. And then you're back in the same spot. It happens all the time where you build this beautiful report and it might take 27 clicks to get there, but you built it and it gives them exactly what they're asking for. Sometimes it's better to give them 90% of what they asked for, but it's easy and straightforward. And as RevOps folks, particularly as you move up in the hierarchy, it's extremely important to understand that balance between perfection and actual usability. And that's a tough one, right? But that's where you build those skills over time.
Love it. Is there anything I haven't asked you about that you'd really like to cover on this topic?
So the other piece, I just have a friendly tip for everyone that I think many RevOps folks, because we constantly have new tasks, many of us are perfectionists, right? We want to keep running through, we want to do all those things. I highly recommend at least once a week sending yourself an email of all the things you accomplished in that week. Sounds kind of silly, right? But what ends up happening at the end of the year, when somebody asks me what I did this year, I can pull a list of all of those emails. And I guarantee you, you forgot about the stuff you did in January by the time you get to December. Not only does this help you with annual reviews, but if you're ever up for a promotion, this helps you with promotion. This helps you with negotiation because you can say, here's all the stuff I accomplished and here's all the outcomes that came from what they did. So it's a little extra tip thrown in there.
That's fantastic. And keep your resume updated as you go, because if you can put stats around it, especially, we had this change within a month, this happened, that looks so good. And people understand that you can tie your goals to company goals, and that's what they're looking for. So that's fantastic advice. Well, I have a fun question for you before we promote your session. If you could go back in time and give yourself career advice, what would it be?
Oh, so this is a great one. Leave that boss. And I won't say who it is, but I think the big thing is there, if you don't feel rewarded in your career and you're a top performer and you're doing the best you can and you're not getting support from your team, find a new team. Don't stay. Don't be miserable. You're worth more than that. Find a team that values you.
Oh my gosh, my head's rattling because I'm nodding so much. So relatable. Yeah, just because somebody treats you poorly and says you can't do stuff, that's not an invitation to prove them wrong.
Right.
It's an invitation to run.
Yes. Which I did not take my own advice earlier in my career.
I didn't either. Some things you have to learn the hard way and you should forgive yourself.
I'm still working on that part, but we'll see how it goes.
Keep your advice. So you were speaking at RevOpsAF in New Orleans. Can you tell us a little bit about the topic?
Yes. We're going to be focusing on RevOps as the go-to-market peacekeeper. Really excited to talk about the interplay. I know we talked a little bit today about understanding your stakeholders, but we're going to talk about when the stakeholders don't agree, what do we do? Many times RevOps can be used to demonstrate metrics, but can also be used sometimes to sway people that are on the fence. Super excited to talk about this, all the intricacies, and give you guys some fun tips.
Where can people find you to network? We'll include some of the links in the show notes.
Oh, all sorts of places. If you're on LinkedIn, you'll find me. You can also go to my website and you can find my book. So beautytoboss.com will get you all the details there. But LinkedIn is your best place. I have talked to many of you guys before. Feel free to inbox me. Let's talk about your concerns and let's get you the job you want.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode, everybody.
For more great content like this, join our community at RevOpsCoop.com and check out the links provided in the show notes.
Keep it RevOpsAF, y'all.